Recording. All right, everyone. So my name is Anna Pimenta. Obviously, I work for Landcare Victoria. We also have with us Andrew McLean, is our CEO, and he'll be doing a little. Andrew just said hello, and we'll be talking a little bit about the DGR status of Landcare Victoria later on. Our main speaker is Esther Abram. She'll be joining us for the first part of the webinar. And then we also have a guest speaker, Dirk Jensen from the Koala, Mornington Peninsula Koala Conservation Landcare Group as a case study, and we'll be doing some group work as well. Just wanted to acknowledge, welcome to the country. So acknowledge the traditional custodians of various lands on which we work today and the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people participating in this webinar. And I pay my respects to the elders past, present and emerging, and recognise and celebrate the diversity of Aboriginal peoples and their ongoing cultures and connections to the lands and waters of Victoria. This is a webinar. This webinar is part of a larger project that involves a series of webinars and workshops to be delivered over the coming months. We've had our first workshop delivered about fundraising in November, and this is our second event, so the webinar. This activities have all been co-funded by DELP and by the Ross Trust. The next thing I've got to do is to introduce Esther. So Esther is our main speaker for today. She has 20 years of experience in the not-for-profit sector, a lot of experience with the philanthropic organizations. She'll be telling us all about other opportunities for fundraising other than your normal grant applications. So I'll head over to Esther, and thanks Esther for making it today. I understand it might be a bit difficult for you today, but thank you so much for coming.
Thanks, Anna, and lovely to see you all on Zoom. As Anna intimated, I've actually got COVID, so this is the best way to have contact with me at the moment via webinar. So I'm not as sharp mentally as I normally am, but I'm hoping that because I think I know this topic pretty well, that I'll still be able to do a good job of presenting and answering any questions that you might have. Now I'll just share my screen so that you can see my presentation. And just see what's happening. Okay. Sorry, my computer's gone a bit wacky. It's showing on my other screen. Anyway, that's fine, no problem. I can do it from here. So yes, I'm going to be talking to you about finding funds for your work in Landcare, and I do want to start by saying that really, I think that the work that you do is incredibly important, and I know that funds are extremely, are really essential for what you do. And personally, I wish that government would fund you a bit more, so you weren't having to spend the sort of time that it takes to raise money from other sources. But here we are in this world where, unfortunately, funding is not as easily accessible as we would like it to be. So that means we need to look elsewhere. And my first, I guess, overriding statement about fundraising is that it is both art and science. So on the one hand, there are all these sorts of, I guess, factual-based things that you need to be aware of, and the first thing really is to have a strategy that underpins the way you go about doing your fundraising. So that's really very much a process that's a science, but there is also an art to it as well. And I think really good fundraisers and good fundraising events are creative and have a little bit of some kind of oomph about them, which makes them stand out and appeal to people. We're going to really cover off very briefly a range of different sources of fundraising. And the thing is, every sort of source that you can look at for money, you know, there's a fair bit involved with how you go about accessing funding from that source. And I'm just really going to skate over it for you today. But really, you know, there are a number of different sorts of ways that you can get funding from your own supporters. So as a group, you'll have people signed up on your, as members or supporters of your group, you'll have a list. And you're in the not-for-profit sector, lists are extremely valuable because they are the people that you can call upon to actually support your work and getting actively involved, but they can also be a source of funding as well. And so groups that actually do fundraising, you know, you no doubt you all participate in these things where you get appeals because you're on a list. So they send you fundraising appeals asking you for money. You may also be a regular donor. So that's from a group's perspective, that's being when someone comes on board as a regular donor, that's actually a really cost-efficient way of getting funding support from a supporter. Because it comes in every month through the bank. There's no asking involved. And there's also major donations that supporters provide. So that's when you're giving a sort of one-off large gifts. And then there's also gifts in wills. So people who leave money to the groups that they're passionate about, issues that they're passionate about in wills. And for a lot of not-for-profit organisations like environmental charities, bequests or gifts and wills are absolutely essential to their day-to-day operation. Then you start to look outside of your group, and the philanthropic sector is probably one that you're going to look at pretty quickly. So the trusts and foundations, I'm going to talk a bit more about them. So they are not-for-profit organisations themselves. They are charities that give money to not-for-profit organisations or other charities. There's also corporate foundations, so where corporations set up a fundraising arm and provide funding through that. There's also businesses that provide funding in lots of different ways, and it might actually not even be funding. It could actually be some sort of concrete help, like providing volunteers. And then there are initiatives that involve the wider community. So crowdsourcing, where people go out, groups go out to the community with a particular initiative and use usually social media to get support for that particular initiative. And then, you know, the other sorts of fundraising, I'm sure you're all aware of, either organising yourselves or being part of. So events, dinners, fundraising drives. And then finally, peer-to-peer, where you actually get people within your community go out and do something to raise money with support from other people. So something like the Oxfam Trail Walker is a peer-to-peer sort of event. So if we look at philanthropy, though, I think philanthropy is actually one of the sources of funding that I most like to talk to people about in Victoria as Victorian Landcare groups, because you may be aware of this, but actually if you're in any other state in Australia, you'd be looking at Victoria and with envy, because we have the greatest number of trusts and foundations and options for philanthropic funding in the country. And that's because back decades ago, there was death duties that people avoided by setting up a foundation through when they passed away in their will. So there's a lot of very old foundations that are still around, where the money was put into, bequested into a foundation, and it's still going on and supporting today's organisations or initiatives. And so, but also we had, I think, very much a strong philanthropic culture, and with a lot of money through manufacturing, retailing, etc. There were a lot of businesses that would set up, wealthy living people would set up foundations. So if you think of things like the Maya Foundation, for instance, the Reichstein Foundation, set up by a wealthy manufacturer, and it still goes on today with Jill Reichstein, the daughter of the originator of the business, running that foundation. But in the early 2000s, there was another new, well, it's not so new now because it's over 20 years old, but the Howard government created the sort of newer lifeblood of philanthropy by setting up two legal vehicles, one called a private ancillary fund and the other one a public ancillary fund, which could be established with money put in, and then the interest of the money gifted out over time. So that means that we've actually had growth in private ancillary funds, or PAFs, which are family foundations predominantly. So this is where you have someone who's made a lot of money. They might have had a business which has done extremely well. They've sold the business. They've had gotten a big amount of money. They decide that instead of paying a huge chunk of tax, what they'll do is they'll set up a private ancillary fund. They'll get an immediate tax deduction for that money they put into that ancillary fund, but they don't have to donate that money straight away. They can donate that money over time. And public ancillary funds, which are actually fundraising entities, and community foundations often operate under this particular legal structure. So they have individuals who set up funds underneath them, and their role is to go out and raise money, invest money, and provide grants. And then there are trustee companies, which are an entirely Australian invention, but they are essentially corporations which are managing a whole lot of money. Some of it, people who have died, could have died 100 years ago, and it's their wills that they're still administering, but also new people who they might be managing, investing their money, for their own personal benefit, but also doing philanthropy. So if you look at, say, Equity Trustees, operates like that. So I'm just going to talk to you a little bit about accessing money from the philanthropic sector. But I think one of the things that's very important to bear in mind with philanthropy is that there is no set approach to it. Like there's a saying in philanthropy that one foundation and one foundation. Like you can't understand the philanthropic sector just by understanding how one philanthropic foundation does their work. They all operate very differently. But one of the key differentiations between entities that operate in the philanthropic sector, or trusts and foundations, is that there is this tension or difference between being head motivated or being heart motivated. So in philanthropy, by trusts and foundations that are actually out there, they use language like, we want impact, we want to see results, we want you to be able to quantify what you are going to achieve, that are actually using their money to achieve particular ends, are often very much head motivated. And that's, I think, very much those that have come from business, where they see investing money in a business sense, they kind of use that approach and they just apply it in philanthropy. But then there's the heart part, and then there are people within philanthropy that are very much motivated by values and emotions. And so it's less about wanting to know what the actual impact is. It's more about resonating with their values and their feelings that encourages them to give. And so you can work out really how with those foundations that actually advertise themselves, that have websites or have programs out there, are clear about what it is that they're wanting to fund. When you read that, you'll get some indication of what it is that that motivates them. But it's very important to try to understand that and to recognise that in how you apply. So just to give you a very quick overview then, you've got in Australia now, we've got just under 2,000 private ancillary funds now, and every year they're giving out $200 million in grants, usually in quite small grants of $5,000 to $10,000, and only a small proportion of that goes to the environment. Those that are actually interested more in the head part would be wanting to know what your impact's going to be on the landscape or an ecology species. They might be interested in carbon sequestration to see the actual figures involved in what you're planning on doing. But then those ones that are more heart motivated will be very inspired by your special places, significant species, perhaps community building, that sort of thing. And private ancillary funds all need DGR. And Andrew's going to talk to you a bit more about that in a moment. But of course, most charities in Australia don't have DGR, but the important thing for small Landcare groups that don't have it is that you can actually join up with others that have DGR to be able to access funding through those sources that need it. Public ancillary funds also need DGR. There's less of them, only 45 in Australia at the moment, but they are giving out between 300 to 400 million, and about 11% of that goes to environment. So public ancillary funds are much more likely to fund environmental causes. And then there's older trusts and foundations, and there's no numbers on them. There's no, because in Australia, there's no need for those entities to report anywhere. They're not regulated in any particular way. There's actually no transparency in those, but many of them don't need DGR because they were set up before the legal structures that needed DGR. So that's very important that you're aware of that. If you're going to apply to them, and they have a trust deed which actually governs how they go about allocating their funding. So I know that Anna will be happy to share this with you, but this is some list of some of the foundations that you could potentially look to fund your work in Landcare. Now, the Foundation for Rural and Regional Renewal, or FRRR, is one that I'm sure that many of you are aware of. They have a lot of different funding rounds, and because they were set up by government specifically to deal with the fact that there wasn't enough philanthropic funding going into rural and regional communities. They have a role of actually trying to harness funds from different sources and apply it in regional communities. And often if there's like an emergency or something, government will roll out grants programs to them because they're very good at funding into communities and small community-based organisations. The Ross Trust, which is one of the funders of this particular work that Landcare Victoria is doing, have SMART grants of $40,000 over 3 years. Helen McPherson Smith Trust again only funds Victorian groups, and they have a new funding stream called Community that is aimed at community connection and capacity. They're particularly interested, from what I can see, in organisations that actually aren't just local community, but actually are supporting a number of community organisations. So if you're a network, for instance, that might have some resonance for them. If you're a peri-urban group, you could look at what the Lord Mayor's Charitable Foundation has available. William Buckland Foundation funds advancing agriculture, so that could be a source to look at. The Natural Resources Conservation Trust, that does building capacity for community-based landscape restoration networks. So they obviously see the value in the sort of work that your groups do. Ian Potter Foundation, they give much larger grants. Everyone wants to get money from the Ian Potter Foundation because they do give very substantial grants. for on-ground conservation of natural resources and preservation of threatened biodiversity and ecosystems. But if you look on the other side of the coin, you can look at the Wet and Haul Environment Trust that only gives small grants, but they give out more small grants. And if you're a small community-based organisation, they could actually be your first opportunity to get some funding from philanthropy. At Equity Trustees, they've got the ANZ, they manage the ANZ Community Foundation that provides $30,000 to community projects. Patagonia, that funds more activist groups that are looking to protect local habitat. And then the Australian Communities Foundation, which is a public ancillary fund that has a number of funders involved as members of their organisation. And what I wanted to show you was this part of the Australian Communities Foundation website. So if you go to in order to get money from philanthropy, what you have to do is to go to all of those organisations, look at their website, see what's available, what sort of funding they have available, what the deadline is for funding proposals, what they're looking at funding. Does it actually meet or would you be eligible for it? Are you wanting to do something that they're interested in funding? It's all very much a one-way process of you looking to them and saying, well, do I meet their criteria? The Australian Communities Foundation actually enable groups to put their work on their actual showcase, and you can do that through their website. And I think that can actually be a really good way if you've got a particular initiative that you don't know if it's doesn't seem to work with any other funding source. This might be a good way of doing it, but I would recommend that you wouldn't be looking at anything more than sort of $20,000 to $30,000 to put up on that, with the hope that some of their funders would get behind it. So groups that are actually looking at getting funding from philanthropy tend to use this sort of a model, and of course there's there's more than one way to do this, but you look for the publicly available grants. So there's only a small number, like in Victoria, it's actually a much larger number than for the rest of the country, but there's a relatively small number of foundations that actually have websites that ask, say to community organisations, we want to fund you, this is where our deadline, put in an application. So that's where you start. If you get funding from them, you actually deliver that project or whatever it was that you got funding for, you fulfill it and you do a really good job of it, and you fulfill all your reporting obligations as well. And then you've got a funder who has actually, you've been able to demonstrate your abilities, and you've got a funder who knows that you're good at doing what you say you're going to do. So you start to engage that funder in your bigger agenda of work. And then if they really like you, eventually they might help to promote you to other funders. One of the things that's really key in this particular game of getting money from philanthropy is that relationships are essential to the whole business. So what you need to always do is, if you receive funding from someone, is to maintain that relationship, which might be, if it's like a foundation that has a program manager there, all they really want to do is to get a report from you on time, etc. You fulfill that, you send them an email message. You might even tell them if you've got a public event coming up and invite them to something or whatever. So you try to manage that relationship, or have as much of a relationship as they want to have with you. But you continue on that relationship and try to use that to build, to get more funding from them ultimately, but also to then get access to other funders. So moving then on to away from philanthropy and into your own support base, and many of the, I guess, the sort of the principles are the same. Just to quickly go over some of the principles really about how to transition your supporters to being funders of your organisation. I guess one of the things that's as I was saying before, your list is actually extremely valuable. And that is the source of your ability to recruit volunteers to do your work, but it also could be the source of funding for your organisation as well. But no one's going to give you any money unless you ask for it. So asking is critical. When it comes to individuals and them providing funding support, they want DGR, but not necessarily. So there are statistics that show that whilst individuals are often, they're very motivated by being able to get a tax deduction, many people don't even claim those tax deductions. And if it's a small donation, they often don't bother about it. So, don't, if you don't have DGR, don't think that you won't get any funding support from anyone. It might not be as much of a barrier as you might think. You have to make it easy to give, and that's why, like, when professional fundraisers who set up systems for organisations to get funding from the community, they have particular websites where you go in. It's very easy, but they ask for as little information as possible, because every extra bit of information you ask a person for means that they could just get annoyed with it and drop off. You'll have seen those boxes that say, do you want to give $30, $50, $100, or amount of your choice? Because most people are quite lazy. They'll just want to go in and click something and then be done with it. So really making it very easy to give. And if you're going to do something, I guess, within a community event, then you need to think about that as well. How do you make it easy to give? Like, if you have a community event and you're trying to do a fundraising drive, if your people can't actually give you money at that time because you don't have the facility to take the money, or you don't have the ability to give the receipt or whatever, as soon as it starts to get complicated, you're going to lose people. So make it easy. Thanking people is just as critical as asking people. So generally speaking, you'll give a receipt, but also thanking them with that, which might be, an email that gets handed over with a receipt, or if it's a personal transaction, personally thank them and tell them how important it is that they actually made the contribution that they did. Often people want to know really what sort of happened or what they helped with. So if you were asking people for funding to put in money for something to happen, let them know later on what happened. Even if you don't have like official reporting requirements, say, you gave this money, which we needed X amount of dollars, you helped us to raise that, and we did this. Thank you. Very important. And keep records of who has provided funding to you, and make sure you pass that on. Like, one of the things that can happen in community organisations is that the relationships with people who've given money, or even foundations that have given money, is held within one or two people in that organisation. And if they then move on from the organisation, if those relationships aren't handed over, the records aren't handed over, then you're starting from scratch. And I've just been working with an organisation recently who, when they had only one staff member, and when that staff member went on to maternity leave, she didn't actually pass on the supporters to the person who took over from her. And they had a whole lot of really great philanthropic supporters, and the records just really got lost. It took quite a bit to tease that out. And then when you go back to those funders to ask them for more money, they say, well, I did fund you before, but, never heard from you, nothing happened, and that's not a good look. It's very easy to close down what would actually have been a really good funding relationship just through sloppiness. So I wanted to show you this just to give you an example of Landcare Australia. So this is an example of trying to make it easy to give. So you'd all be aware that Landcare has a website where you can actually give, people can give money to a Landcare group. So very easy, what is it that you want to fund? Like, they're trying to get funding for a whole range of groups on there, but they try to make it easy in terms of putting that on. would you like to make this a monthly donation? Like, so right up there up front, because that's a really great thing if they say yes. And then, or is it a fixed donation? Boom, you know, it happens really easy. So another form of fundraising then is crowdfunding. And this is one where it can actually be a really popular and exciting way to raise money when you've got a particular drive that you're trying to do. You've got something quite concrete in mind that you want to get funding for. So it's not a way of raising core funds. You wouldn't do a crowdfunding. You wouldn't crowdfund for, you know, to be able to pay for your bookkeeper, for instance. That just wouldn't go down. But you could crowdfund to do some really exciting revegetation initiative, or something that had some nice photos, and something that people would become really interested in. And in crowdfunding, you know, you have a target and people pledge an amount towards that target. And one of the big things about the platforms that use, a platform being just a website, there's different ones that provide the facility. They actually enable you, when you go on as a user, to see how much money's been raised and to make your contribution, and to see how that's adding up to the bigger picture. And, you know, in the behavioural psychology, they find that, you know, people love being the last one to give funding. So fundraising drives tend to really go off when they start to get to the end bit, because people really want to, you know, help be the person who gets it over the line. So there's a whole lot of psychology involved in the way they set these things up. So if you're going to use crowdfunding, do be aware that the different platforms work in different ways. And so they all have fees associated with them, but different structures of that. And some of them are easier to use than others. So it's worth doing a bit of research. And you can actually just do a Google search for, you know, crowdsourcing platforms compared, and you'll get a whole lot of information about different ones that are available. When these first came about, it was very much a kind of a winner keeps all type approach. So what would happen is that the group would set a target, and if they didn't make the target, they didn't get any money at all. Whereas that still exists for some things, but you don't have to. But not all platforms work on that way. And some of them also were very much about more in line with raising money for business. So so there would be rewards offered, but there are ones that are just really for community as well. So you don't have to give a reward. So if I show you this one, this is GoFundMe, which does a lot of community organisation type of fundraising. This is the Friends of Honeysett Pond volunteer group. You can see how they've got a goal of 7,500, and we can see how much money they've raised already and how many donations they've got. There's this nice little thing which shows you how much money people are giving. This is very motivating when people see other people giving. You know, ultimately people are sheep, so, you know, we'll do something that other people are doing. And it gets very easy to share. So, so what you hope is not only that people donate it, funding, but they share as well and get other people to donate. This is Give Now, and Give Now is part of our community suite of facilities that it provides community groups. And this is actually, I think, a pretty something that I would recommend everyone looks at having, regardless of where you're at fundraising wise, because what it does, it gives you a bit of a web presence, and people can give donations through this particular site. You have your own page, and with a little bit of information about your group, and people can go in there and give money to your group. And if you've got that set up, then it means that you've always got something that you can share with people when you've got a drive going on that you're trying to get funding for something in particular. So the final thing is community fundraising. And this is something that I'm sure that you're all more expert in than what I am. I'm probably more of a participant rather than an organizer of community fundraising drives. But, you know, in community fundraising, you could actually involve a bit of everything that I've just talked about. You could actually have an initiative where you get a little bit of philanthropic funding to help with the drive. You could have some individuals providing some funding. You might actually have set up a page on Give Now. You might have some events and creative things that people get involved with. But I think that the thing that's really different about community fundraising is a focus on community, that you're actually involving the community in the raising the money and perhaps thinking about how to raise the money as well. And so this I think can be really good because it actually, you know, it's working where your strengths are, which is really in engaging the community and in coming together to do specific work. But it's also, it gets people involved who, you know, maybe not as great at the working outdoors part of Landcare work, might actually be happier doing this particular important part of the work. And it can really help to raise awareness of what your group does within the community. But it's resource intensive. It takes a lot of time and effort to work with people, to get people involved. And so you have to get volunteers, you have to manage volunteers. So it's not just because it's community and voluntary doesn't mean that it doesn't have resources tied up in it. Just wanted to show you this, which is an example from the Central Victorian Violence Alliance. They set up a campaign for a particular piece of work that they're doing. It's like a corridor that they're restoring and doing a whole lot of ecosystem work. But what they did was they took a very strongly community-based approach to developing it up, including the name of the actual initiative, and they've got a very strong arts component in it. So the people who got involved in the project, the communities where this particular work was happening, was a lot of artists. They ran photography competitions. They did things involving the schools. They got posters up in all the local businesses. You know, so there was a whole lot of stuff that happened to really raise the profile of the of this particular initiative. And I just really liked the way they had really focused in on giving it a really inspiring name and having a beautiful photograph that's actually quite, you know, it makes you interested in it. And then there's getting support from business. So as I mentioned before, businesses can support community in more ways than just funding. So they can actually provide, pardon me, volunteers for your initiatives. Also, some businesses do things like mentoring. They might discount their services. They could provide sponsorship, which usually involves you promoting them as part of that financial arrangement. They could actually facilitate their employees making donations to your organisation. With this area, really, there are, I guess, higher risks involved than in other forms of fundraising. You do have to really think about the value alignment, like your values and their values. So what is it that they want to get out of it, and what is it that you want to get out of it? There are instances where organisations receive money from businesses and it becomes embarrassing for those receiving the funding when those businesses, you know, are doing things that, you know, that get negative media attention. So you really need to have a policy in place and have thought very much about, you know, what are the sorts of businesses that you wouldn't want to take money from, but also I think do definitely think more broadly than dollars, because often with businesses, if you can have a particular business that you think you could have a relationship with, then money might not be the first thing that you get to. You might get to something else before you get to the dollars, but it would be about developing and fostering a relationship to make that work. And look, I think that for Victorian Landcare, I know that everyone who gets involved in fundraising for groups and trying to keep small community groups going, you know, for most groups find this is really hard yards. There's a lot of work involved with fundraising, and you don't always get the funding that you hoped you would get when you put in the effort to raise money. But it's definitely worth bearing in mind that at the moment, we are going through entering into a phase where we have this enormous transfer of wealth. So as people die and leave money to their younger generations, that's like $3 trillion of wealth that's actually being moved down the line. And that is opens up a lot of opportunities in terms of cash, whether it be through bequests or whether it be through younger generations of people getting control of trusts and foundations and having stronger alignment with the environment and recognition of the urgency and the importance of the work. So it can only be a good thing for organisations that do the sorts of work that your organisations do. But also, of course, in Victoria, we've gone through this amazing change post-COVID, where a lot of people moved into regional Victoria out of Melbourne, you know, to escape being in a place, you know, being in a pandemic, and also, you know, being in Melbourne is not actually, you know, a fabulous place to live in all the time. So a lot of people really aspire to moving into regional Victoria. So there are new people going into communities who want to connect and contribute to those communities, and they might have very little ecological awareness, but actually being involved in groups like yours could be something where they could learn about that. But they might actually come in with a whole lot of skills that you could use at a different sorts of skills, or they might just want to be involved in a way where they provide a little bit of funding support or help in that way. So there is definitely this sense that, you know, money and land is changing hands, and that actually has opportunities for all of you. So just to give you some tips, really think about your strategy first. What do you want to raise money for? Like, what do you need money for? How much do you need? Where are the best places to get that money from? When you know what sort of funding you want to go for, become really good at it. And always think about how much it costs you to raise that money, so that you're not spending a lot of time on, you know, instead of doing the actual work itself, trying to raise the money. You've got to do that cost benefit analysis. Make sure what you do isn't boring, like really try to up the visuals, you know, come up with beautiful names. I think really step that up. If you're going to go to the effort of applying for funds, if you don't meet the criteria, then just don't bother about it. Like really, it just, you know, you're not going to, even if you've got the most fabulous project in the world, they rule out a whole lot of people who actually all meet the criteria. So they're not going to rule someone in who doesn't meet the criteria. And, you know, and it really is relationships. You know, the best funders you're going to have are the ones you've already got. So make sure that you thank and acknowledge them and keep in touch with them. And that's it. I'll stop sharing.
Thank you, Esther. That was amazing. I can't believe you managed to deliver such a good presentation under COVID influence. Thank you so much. Yeah, so there was we've got time for a couple of questions, and there's one in the chat that is quite a simple one. Should be a quick answer, but if anyone else has got an imminent question, please raise your hand and I'll unmute you, or unmute yourself. I think you can do that. But Marilyn asked, like, we are registered with the ATNC. if people donate money to us, is it tax deductible for them?
No, it's not. So there's a difference between being a charities and being and having deductible gift recipient status. So when you're a charity, you get a certain kind of tax status. You don't have to pay income tax, but to actually have deductible gift recipient status means going through another process to apply for that. So for environmental organisations, it generally means going onto the register of environmental organisations, and that's a whole additional process that you go through to get on that. I always recommend to community organisations to really think about whether you need to go through all that hassle of doing that. It takes an awfully long time to get it, and then you've got someone you've got to report to, and you've got to maintain it. So if you're only actually going to do the occasional fundraising drive where you would need DGR, then look to another source like Landcare Victoria or Foundation FRRR also allows organisations to set up an account with them too for DGR purposes.
Thank you, Esther. Last chance, anyone else has got any questions for Esther? Raise your hand if you do. All right, 3, 2, 1, we'll move on. Thanks, Esther. So you're welcome to stay, or we completely understand if you want to take a break now.
That's all right. I'll crawl back to my bed now. Thanks, everyone. Good luck with it.
Thank you, Esther. All right. So next we've got Berg Jensen he also delivered a small presentation for us at our last workshop. Was very welcomed by everyone. I think he's got great tips. Dirk is a great example of someone young and with a set of skills that are not very common to Landcare, and he's definitely used them very well. So I'll head over to you, Dirk, if you're okay with that.
Thank you very much, Anna. And I appreciate you calling me young. I will take it. Look, I probably can just reinforce some of the messages that Esther's already provided. It's topical for me at the moment because we are gearing up again for tree planting for 2023 on the Mornington Peninsula. For us, that involves planting on anywhere between 25 or 30 different properties. We're aiming to plant again around 20,000 plants in 2023. And in order to do that, I need roughly between $100,000 and $120,000 each year, which is every year a fun exercise to work out where we get this funding from. And look, really, the things that I've learned, I guess, over the last couple of years to achieve sort of that level of funding every year, I just wanted to share with you probably a few simple examples here. So the first one, obviously, is positivity. So in the days of social media, and also generally because you're attracting sponsors, volunteers, whoever actually cares about your group and your cause, you need to be positive 100% of the time. You cannot have any negative interactions with anyone because negativity spreads, and also people are turned off by it. There's so much also negative environmental messaging in the media and all the doom and gloom stories that we see in the news every day. We've got a fairly strong following on our Facebook and Insta pages, but I try and stay away even from sharing all the gloom and doom every day because it just does people's heads in. And I still think people are more attracted by the positivity and the things that you can do and that they can be part of than listening and reading all the negativity every day. And also at the events, we have a few very passionate people when we plant trees to make sure that the trees are planted right and straight and well. But at the same time, you can't tell people off constantly. You got to try and show people a good time. People are giving up their spare time and their free time to come and support you. And really, we're trying every time, again, to stay clear of any negativity, plan well for our events so that on the day you don't have a lot of arguments about what needs to happen and who does what. And then really try and have a good time and build, sort of a good team environment, at each of the events so that people come back. So that for me is like a fundamental thing. We need to have positive interactions, otherwise you end up turning people off very quickly. The planning, I know everyone says it, that it's really important, but I find, especially for the larger grant applications that I go for, I generally lately don't apply for grants anymore for less than $10,000 because I feel like the effort involved for some of the smaller grants is just as much as going for the larger ones. So I tend to generally go for the larger grants. And really the first thing that all of them ask is, what's your mission? What's your vision? What's your, what are your key measures, your key objectives? And all this stuff you should be able to rattle off very, very easily. And also, I find once I've done a couple of grant applications, I would never say it openly, but you can do a bit of copy and pasting and reuse information that you've used before. It just helps if you have a strategic plan for the group and you have all those fundamental things again ready on hand. Actually applying for grants then it becomes a lot easier too. The other thing for me is you need a good elevator pitch. So if you're talking to people on the phone or you're, trying to attract sponsors, I sometimes cold call people with varying success. But you need an elevator pitch. And if you can't communicate in 1 or 2 sentences what you're about and what you're trying to do, you lose people straight away. I could tell you now, very technically, that we are planting many, many different species of indigenous, locally sourced indigenous plants according to the EVC in that particular area. And you lose people straight away. It's too much information. So instead, I say we are planting trees for koalas on the Mornington Peninsula, where 70% of habitat is on private property. And therefore, most of the time, we're planting on private land. And it's easy for people to understand, at least in 1 sentence, what you're doing without getting too technical. I feel like people get often very passionate and very technical very quickly and want to show their knowledge and their depth of understanding. But when you're trying to attract people that have not the first idea generally about environmental conservation, you lose them very quickly if you're going too technical. So try and keep it simple and have a good elevator pitch. Partnerships and sponsorships. For me, obviously, trying to get sponsors and partners that work with us every year is the holy grail, and that's amazing if you can achieve that. So of our $100,000 or $120,000 that we have to raise every year, probably just over half that is regular sponsors, and then I have to find new ones, for the remaining funding every year. But even those, the regular sponsors, that doesn't mean that it becomes any easier. You still need to provide reporting. Obviously, I still need to apply every year, even to our regular sponsors. I need to provide reporting of what we've done at the end of the year. Often we need to nurture the relationship throughout the year. So those sponsors want to bring out, for example, sometimes corporate groups for tree planting, or want to bring out their own staff to actually see firsthand what we do on the ground. And all of that, takes effort. It takes building relationships. You've got to know who your sort of key people are at those organizations that you need to deal with. And you constantly really have to nurture those relationships year after year. So I don't actually think it's less effort, but it's probably better the devil you know, because you know really what to expect from those sponsors and partners. And we're also constantly finding new ways to try and engage our sponsors. Social media, you really can't do much at scale anymore without social media. We constantly share our tree planting events and images of completed projects and what we've done online, because the first thing the sponsors do is will go to your social media and check out all the photos and check out what you've done. So that definitely is very helpful. Try and keep it simple. So on the Mornington Peninsula, there's so much pressure from urbanization from Melbourne that there are so many problems. There's pest animals, pest plants, lots and lots of different types of weeds that are invading our remaining bushland. There's overdevelopment. There's so many different issues, and I could get dragged into all of them if I'm not careful. But then I couldn't manage planting 20,000 trees in a year. It just doesn't work. So we've really at the moment limited ourselves to planting back habitat and planting vegetation wherever we can. We're not really getting much into weed management unless we find a really good property that where there's lots of scope for revegetation, and then there are weeds that we need to manage in that process. We will do that. But we're trying to keep it simple. We're getting a little bit into road signage as well with the councils on the Mornington Peninsula, and installing temporary road signs to especially make our tourists to the Mornington Peninsula in spring or summer aware of koalas on the road. And we do have a lot of roadkill during spring and summer. But other than that, I really try and focus on our really big revegetation project every year, dealing with 25 or 30 different landholders, making sure we've got all the supplies ready at the right time, to be able to complete our project over autumn and winter. That takes a lot of energy and a lot of resources. And we're also trying to optimize what we do. So lately I can plant with our group 1,000 trees in one morning, and we've really worked hard over the last couple of years to optimize how we do things and how we become efficient, so that it's also depending on whether or not you get 15 people or 20 people or 40 people show up at a tree planting event, which you never know actually who shows up on the day, that we're still sure that we can complete the work that we have planned on that day and don't have to go back. We don't have time to go back with the amount of different properties that we've got to manage. So trying to keep things simple, do fewer things, but do them well, and learn to do them well over time. That goes into the next one, really starting small, building on your successes, learning from the failures. We had lots and lots of failures, lots and lots of knockbacks, lots and lots of projects or events that probably didn't go as well as we had hoped. And you learn over time, and we've sort of become a well-oiled machine, and it's running a lot better these days than it did in the very beginning. And look, lastly, really, we're trying to build a community around our group. So we've got many local businesses that are really keen to get involved with us, that we engage through different types of events. We also attend lots of markets and lots of community events, usually have a small stall, sell some merchandise, talk to people about conservation and about our koala population on the peninsula, and try and really see that we engage lots of different groups at really varied events throughout the year, so that we're not constantly just targeting the people that are already interested in nature conservation anyway. They're probably the easiest ones to target, but we're trying to really find different ways of engaging different groups. We've done a lot of work with sort of local wineries and breweries that have put on events for us. And again, it's a completely different demographic and different people that show up to a brewery on a Friday night versus people that show up on a tree planting event the next day. So really, we're trying to build this community. There's lots of businesses that support us year after year and that share our stories and our successes with us, and that promote our course for us. That's been fantastic. But again, it just takes this relationship management really constantly and trying to find new ways of engaging the community. Don't worry about setbacks. We all have them, lots of them. And often, you know, if I'm applying for grants at the moment, at least 50% probably fail or I'm not successful, but the other 50% I do get. And then hopefully I get 1 or 2 ongoing sponsors out of them each year, and we're growing sort of our portfolio of regular sponsors. But yeah, I think my tips.
Thank you, Dirk. Yeah, hope you enjoyed it. So please, if you have any questions for Dirk, go ahead. It feels like a one-way conversation here, so please feel free to join us, making it a little bit more interactive. Yeah, feel free to unmute yourself, raise your hand. Yeah, otherwise we can leave them to a little bit later as well. Yes, all right, we have a raised hand, so go ahead. David, is it?
Might stop sharing. That might be easier.
Oh, no, I think it's Andrew's raised his hand. Andrew, do you want to say something?
Yeah, Anna, thanks. I always like to fill a vacuum. That's a fantastic story, Dirk, and well done to you.
Thank you.
I wonder, say this without, I'll frame this question up. The demographic, the socio-economic demographic features of the Mornington Peninsula suggests to me that there may be some money available for you. I obviously fancy European cars on the Mornington Peninsula Freeway.
Oh, yes.
Do you think that that's been a significant factor? Is it that local, you know, the holiday home people, the tourism people, are they significant supporters of your work?
Not so much the tourists coming down to the peninsula, but some of the tourist businesses, they support us, and even tour companies and, you know, people that want to offset their carbon. We actually refer them to an organization called 15 Trees in Ballarat. They do the carbon offsetting, and then they pass on, you know, some of the funds from the local businesses to us then for revegetation. But we do also for our landholders. I mean, the Mornington Peninsula is, you know, there's some beautiful properties, some very wealthy people, and we're going sometimes to very wealthy people's properties to plant trees. And we had lots and lots of discussion in the beginning of whether or not we should charge people for tree planting. And some groups do, they charge a percentage and say you need to contribute 10% yourself. We've decided not to do that. Our motto is we try and keep it as simple for people to get involved in conservation as possible. So also for me, actually chasing people constantly for that 10% is actually probably more work than it's worth. But we have now found that there's a really good way after a tree planting event. We generally leave the landholder with a pay it forward letter. And it's a letter that we pop in their letterbox or hand it to them when we leave, and say, if you want to pay it forward so that we can continue doing what we've just done on your property on other properties next year, you can donate to us. And here are the details for Landcare Australia to do the donation. And we find actually a lot of them do that, and often sizable donations. So hundreds, if not thousands of dollars that they contribute, even though they don't have to. So that actually has been more successful than I thought.
Thanks, Dirk. Well done to you.
Thank you, Andrew and Dirk. So there's one more question. Dirk, what part, David is asking, what part does fencing off vegetation and the cost of that figure in your costing of projects?
Yeah, fencing, my God. So look, generally our motto is we actually don't pay for fencing. So we say to the landholder up front that we pay for trees, tree guards, and they get a lot of free labor from us, obviously, to install it all, but they need to install fencing. Now, I will say, if there are some really, really good properties, or a really good property and they are struggling to fund fencing, I will sometimes contribute or find a way of contributing funding. But most of the time, it's the landholder's responsibility to provide fencing. If we had to provide fencing for 25 or 30 different properties, that just wouldn't be possible. Luckily for us, a lot of farming type properties on the Mornington Peninsula are not actually farms anymore. Not many of them have cattle and livestock anymore where fencing is required. A lot of them are hobby farms, and have very little in terms of livestock and animals. But it does sometimes become an issue, and then it's really sort of property by property that we have to try and work out how valuable is this property to us, and do we want to contribute to fencing or not. We do refer a lot of properties for especially that have creeks running through their properties, to Melbourne Water for stream frontage and the stream frontage program, because Melbourne Water obviously will contribute significant funds to revegetation around creeks and bodies of water. That's reasonably successful for us, but I try and stay away from fencing where I can.
Thank you. Thank you so much for your presentation and for donating your time today. I think that most of the tips, if not all of the tips, really, we can all use in our different projects. They're all transferable. Hope you enjoyed it. Now, welcome everyone. I know this can be a bit strange, someone just closing these conversations right at the good moments, but we had to do it. I hope you had an opportunity to learn from each other what some of you might do in your groups, and yeah, just to meet new people. We're gonna now hand over to Andrew, our Landcare Victoria CEO. Andrew will talk about our DGR status and how you might be able to use it. Over to you, Andrew.
Thanks, Anna. I'll share my screen if that's okay. Yes?
Yes, sorry, yes.
I take silence as assent. So you should be seeing a little slide about Landcare Victoria DGR Fund. Is that correct? Thumbs up, yes?
Yep.
You are seeing it? Good. So I'm just going to whip through these dot points very quickly. The good news, the headline news, I guess, is that Esther mentioned the importance of a DGR fund to enable people to make tax-deductible donations, and also because it's a legal requirement on some of those. I think the private ancillary funds have to donate to a DGR fund. So Landcare Victoria has established a fund that's gone through a very tedious process through the Commonwealth Government, and has that fund up and going. It is intended to be a facility that's available to members of Landcare Victoria. So I know some of our members already set up DGR funds. They're ahead of us, but for those of you that haven't, you have the opportunity to jump on board our fund. But to make that work, we're going to need to go through a few. We need to adhere to a few bits of process and principle. So it's available, as I say, to you to support your fundraising. What we'll be asking you to do is to direct your donors to our website, and there they will find the Donate Now button, and we'll be able to go through the process that Esther actually showed you, the Landcare Australia version of this site. There'll be something very similar on the Landcare Victoria website. The donor platform that we're using will automatically issue receipts. So when the donors made their donation, they'll get a receipt which gives them the information that they need to make their, to keep the tax commissioner happy when they're completing their tax return. They'll be able to claim the deduction on the basis of that receipt. there's a couple of really important things that you need to be aware of in regard to a DGR fund, and this is that donations have to be freely given. So we've had some groups say, can we get our membership fees, can we make them tax deductible? And the answer to that is no, because there's a service in the form of your membership that is provided. So that cannot be used. That sort of revenue cannot come into the DGR fund. And likewise, the donor can't say, I'll give you this money providing you use it this way. That's not a donation. But if you look at the next point, donors may, however, express a preference, and the website we're setting up will allow for that. So if the donor has a great fondness for the Bushy Creek Landcare Group, they will be able to say, I would be very pleased if my donation was directed to the Bushy Creek Landcare Group. Now, Landcare Victoria will, because we value the Bushy Creek Landcare Group too, will almost certainly honour that. It's important to know that we're not legally bound to do that, but we'd be dumb if we didn't, basically. So unless there's some reason not to, we will certainly honour that. Our present intention is that we'll accumulate donations in the DGR fund, and once a month we'll disperse them to member groups in accordance with those expressed preferences, and we'll provide you with a list of the donations that we've received in your favour. Then in returning those funds to you, it's important that those funds be used only to support Landcare purposes. So the defined purposes are effectively the purposes written into the Landcare Victoria rules, which is pretty broad. If you're doing Landcare work, you'd struggle not to fit within them. But if you decided to use them to organise a rock and roll concert or something like that, you'd be outside. You can't use the funds for that purpose. Where the donation platform will collect 1.5% of donations made up to a cap of $25, I think. And then when it comes to returning funds to you, for every, basically we're going to keep back 5% to support the administration costs of this facility. You'd be surprised about how much work is involved in this, but we'll cap that at $500. So if you're lucky enough to get a donation in excess of $10,000, you'll pay no more than $500 for that transaction. We'll be asking member groups to pre-register, so we've got all the necessary information in advance, and also in registering we'll be saying we need you to make a few declarations back to us, which are, that you understand that the donations have to be freely given, and you understand that any funds returned to you can only be used for Landcare related purposes. And we have your BSB and your bank account details and the contact and all that sort of stuff. So we don't want to be having to sort of chase that up retrospectively. We'd like you to fill in a little form. So as I say here, we've got up and running by Christmas, but we're busting our boiler to do that. The interesting, mostly it's in place. One of the more difficult challenges is the challenge that Dirk raised with us, the need for a simple elevator pitch. So we've got a bit of creative wordsmithing we need to do to populate a web page, and then I think once we've done that, we'll be able to get that up and going by Christmas, and you'll find that the registration process will be up on the member services part of our website, and you'll be able to fill in a little form, get it back to us, and go to work and use that DGR fund for your own benefit. I'll stop at that, I think, Anna, because I'm conscious of the time.
Yeah, but we've got a question here from Mike. It's a good question. So if someone wishes to donate to our group through the LVI DGR portal, when you return the funds to us, will we get to know any knowledge of the donor? Example, can we thank them personally? Yes, that's that you'll get. At the end of the month, we'll give you, it'll probably just be an Excel report, but here's a list of the donations we've received on your behalf. Here's the money, and you'll get those contacts. We are saying that we'll be keeping that data too, and Landcare Victoria might well use that for our own fundraising purposes in the future. But you'll certainly get that. Thank you.
When we get those donations.
Any other question? One more question. We've got time for one more, and that's it. Our group's just getting going. Would you be able to register next year after we have sorted out our governance and plans?
but yeah, there's no deadline. As soon as you're ready to go, fill in the form. There's not any time. Yep.
And feel free to contact us. We've got an email. I'll show you the email at the end of the presentation for any other questions. I just thought I'll share quickly before we go. From our previous workshop, we had some group work as well, and I'll just quickly run through some of the ideas that came up from that. So some people said they go to the local bank, so for example, Bendigo Bank, to look for some funds. Someone mentioned membership fees could be collected via Survey Monkey. They've got and I've got a link there. Don't worry, I can send all this information to you at later. That is a good opportunity to manage your memberships and also to get some donations as well. Partnerships with local businesses, local council grants, CMAs and DEL grants. LinkedIn, for anyone that is interested, is also a great tool for getting funds from sponsors. Have a backup plan if it fails, obviously. Some of the most common activities that it's worth pointing out that sometimes they're worth it, sometimes they're not. So if they're run by volunteers, most of the times they could be worth it. If you're paying staff to do them, they might not be worthwhile. So these are some examples. Council grants, charge for events. These days are, events, if they're not free, they're usually more valued. Talk to your clubs. Grant Guru, someone mentioned our version of Enviro Fund from funds that could be used to Landcare. We could do some advocacy with that. Another thing that came up recently is that I thought I could do a WhatsApp group of some of our members expressed the need to network or better network with other people, with other groups. So I've decided to open up a WhatsApp group. You need an app for that on your phone. It's free. And you create a group, and where instead of going through Facebook, we can just chat to each other there, and any questions about fundraising, you can pop in there, and I will just be facilitating it. It'll be all between you, and you can, if you might know a group that is doing some really cool things, and you might learn from them. So yeah, sharing your good stories and tips. So you can text me or send me an email if you're interested in joining with your phone number. My details are there. You also got my email. And thank you so much for joining us. Just a quick request, and you all know that how important this is, that we need to fill in a quick survey. It's all done here. It should only take you, you logged in okay, so it's not letting me do the polls now for some reason. I might just have to stop sharing. Sorry. I'll see if I can do it now. Oh no, it's not letting me do the polls. Okay. Well, if you don't mind, I'll send you an email with an evaluation survey to see what you thought of the day, so we can track change and report to our funding entities. And yeah, but thank you so much for attending. I hope that went okay. Yeah, I really enjoyed listening to all the presentations and to the questions. There'll be more to come. We've got some webinars and workshops to organize for next year. We'll let you all know dates and the themes, but I'm sure there will be all of your interest. So thank you so much, and I hope you have a good evening.
Thanks, Anna.
See you, everyone.
Yes, thank you.
Thanks, everybody. That was great.